We are doing our project on C.S. Lewis and his contributions to Christian ethics and worldview. And I'm Jewel, and my group members are Sarah and Matthias. Okay, so C.S. Lewis, his full name is Clive Staples Lewis, and he was a writer and still is a writer with international fame. His death was in 1963, which was over 50 years ago, and he is still being highly recognized. C.S. Lewis had a gift. Because of his questionable Christian faith for a long time and then turning to true Christianity, Lewis had experience and a certain type of understanding of the world. The knowledge he had mixed with his literary skill, Lewis had the ability to express what he believed. Lewis talks a lot about Christian ideals, beliefs, ethics, truth, morality, spiritual realm, and incorporates his beliefs on those topics in each book and writing of his. Joy Davidman was her maiden name, and she was an American poet and writer. And then 4 years later, she died of breast cancer, so they were only married for 4 years. And November 22nd, 1963 is when C.S. Lewis died of heart trouble. And a few more facts, he was a part of an Oxford literacy group named the Inklings. And he wasn't really known as C.S. Lewis throughout his life. He was known as Jack, which was a nickname that he gave to himself. And he has over 30 books published, and also poems and essays and letters and stuff like that. And then he also has a lot of very famous quotes. And one of those is, "True humility is not thinking less of yourself, it is thinking of yourself less." Okay.
All right. So as we learned from many of C.S. Lewis's works that he has left for us, including Mere Christianity, we know that C.S. Lewis was a firm believer in a baseline morality, or a sense of right and wrong, justice and injustice, that is inherent to the whole of humanity. And he discussed this idea in depth in his work called Mere Christianity. In C.S. Lewis on Absolutes, an article published by the C.S. Lewis Institute, Dr. Art Lindsley quotes Lewis's thoughts on morality, as he recorded in his work Mere Christianity. "But how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust?" So essentially, Lewis decided that there must be some sort of intuitive standard that all people use as a basis for judging good and evil. He called this standard the law of nature, or moral law. Now, perhaps Dr. Lindsley says it best when he concludes with Lewis that if evil exists, there must be a fixed, absolute, transcendent standard by which we can know it to be evil. This absolute standard points toward a God as a being who has this absolute standard in himself. As a Christian studying ethics, it is important to note that this concept of baseline morality, and the fact that we don't always follow it, is not only key to understanding the human condition, it is also key in the understanding and handling of a variety of ethical issues. Perhaps Lewis was not the first person to write on this idea, but his work and reputation certainly caused a much wider dissemination of the concept as it stands. Pause. Sorry. As documented by Bruce L. Edwards in his article on Mere Christianity, Lewis also made it his mission to reinforce the truths that have been essential to Christianity since the beginning, regardless of denomination or church within the faith. Lewis dug deep to find what beliefs have been common to nearly all Christians at all times. Now, Edwards in his article goes on to say that by avoiding denominational distinctives, Lewis provides a guide to that common core of beliefs that nearly all Christian denominations have held since the 1st century AD. So Lewis proposed that these foundational truths include that our collective lack of morality in action despite our inborn sense of morality, or decent behavior, which Lewis calls the law of nature. From a Christian ethicist point of view, it is our sinful nature against the law of nature given to us by God. We have a desire to help the drowning man, yet we have a desire to keep ourselves safe. Two instincts warring against one another beneath a third voice, the law of nature, that says that what we ought to do is help the drowning man, despite the danger it puts us in. Even in a moral dilemma such as this, the Christian ethicist can say with confidence that we as the human race have an inborn understanding of the right thing to do, whether we are Christians or not. Thus, we know that in the weighing of a moral dilemma, we cannot as Christians ignore this law of nature that God has placed in the minds of all humans. Later on, in Mere Christianity, Lewis proceeds to outline the three things that are central to morality. Fair play and harmony between individuals is number one. Number two, tidying up or harmonizing the things inside each individual. And number three, the general purpose of human life as a whole, what man was made for, what course the whole fleet ought to be on, or what tune the conductor of the band wants it to play. So I see this as Lewis offering a new perspective on the focus of our morality. He gives these three center points. If we are to think about morality, we must think of all three departments: relations between man and man, things inside each man, and relations between man and the power that made him, or God.
There are two equal and opposite errors into which our race can fall about the devils. One is to disbelieve in their existence, the other is to believe and feel an excessive and unhealthy interest in them. This is a quote from the Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis. One of the contributions of Lewis is that he gets his readers to contemplate ideas about the spiritual realm, ideas about man's eternal destination of heaven or hell, and also the idea that spiritual beings and principles affect our daily lives on earth. He does this primarily through fiction. In C.S. Lewis's book, The Great Divorce, he writes about a man who takes a bus ride from heaven to the gates, he takes a bus ride from hell to the gates of heaven. And upon arriving at the gates of heaven, the inhabitants of the bus are told that if they are willing to give up certain things, they may journey past the gates and into heaven, rather than return to hell on the bus. As the story progresses, the man witnesses as each spirit in turn chooses to go back to hell rather than stay in heaven. The man sees what each spirit was unwilling to give up in order to journey on past the gates, and the principle of the story being that in order to receive the things of heaven, one must give up all the things of hell and on earth. So he's using a fictional story to portray ideas of the Christian worldview and get people thinking about these. C.S. Lewis vividly illustrates a fictional version of what heaven and hell are like. The effect the book has on the reader is that they begin to question what heaven and hell are really like. It also causes the reader to evaluate themselves, to ask the question, are these things what I am unwilling to give up? Are there things that I am unwilling to give up to journey past the gates of heaven? By reading about the fictional heaven and hell, the reader begins to think of the reality of heaven and hell. Another great contribution of C.S. Lewis is his book, The Screwtape Letters. The Screwtape Letters. It's a fictional book about a senior devil teaching a junior devil how to tempt. Lewis brings up the reality that eventually all people will either end up in heaven or hell. The book does not address specifics of salvation, but rather the many ways a person can be guided to hell. The book imposes the idea that spiritual beings can influence a human's thoughts by subtle suggestion. The book gives a fictional representation of demons that is not intended to be seen as a reality. Rather, the fiction is a package for ideas and overarching morals. One of the overarching morals to the Screwtape Letters is that daily decisions bring one closer to one's final destination, either closer to heaven or closer to hell. The Screwtape Letters also shows how a man can rationalize his poor behavior and how man is often self-centered, not perceiving all situations from a proper perspective. It is often the case that when reading C.S. Lewis, what begins as merely enjoying a work of fiction ends up inciting all kinds of intellectual thoughts and questions. This, I believe, is one of Lewis's greatest contributions regarding Christian worldview, that his ideas are presented through fiction rather than through a book specifically on philosophy or worldview, although he does have some books like that as well. By presenting his ideas through fiction, he's able to reach a far broader audience than merely those who would pick up a book on philosophy or worldview. This has been most beneficial to preceding generations. Many people have a greater understanding of a Christian worldview and a greater capacity for intellectual thought because of Lewis's writings. You can pause it. Another great contribution of Lewis is that he presents biblical principles in a way that is easily understood and intellectual, such as in Mere Christianity and The Abolition of Man. Lewis phrases things in a contemporary way in order to be easily understood by the readers of his day. Lewis had a good understanding of the ideas and values of the culture around him. Although many things have changed, Lewis's writing seems just as relevant today as it was in the 1960s. People continue to read and enjoy his books. Many read in order to benefit from his knowledge and insight, and many more merely to enjoy a good story. By writing both fiction and nonfiction, Lewis has appealed to a vast audience of both young and old, both the man seeking answers and the man seeking adventure. He has educated and informed the generations of people who have read his books. C.S. Lewis had a lot of great insight into a lot of important topics. He addressed life, death, the spiritual realm, many great ideas through Christian worldview, about Christian worldview. Throughout his life, he was Protestant and then atheist, then theist, and then finally found Christianity again and became very passionate about that throughout his life. He was exposed to so many different views. His writing appeals to the average person as well as to philosophically minded people. Lewis's writing has had much to say about Christian worldview and ethics. Throughout his books, poems, and other writings, we can learn so much. He has helped many readers to form opinions and to be able to think and gain knowledge about difficult topics and important topics regarding Christian worldview and ethics, and has provided a great basis for the learning of others.